So good morning, everyone from sunny Kent. It's a real pleasure to be asked to chair this webinar, which I think really covers a very timely subject. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Southeast Regional Chair of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. Contact me via the conference organisers or indeed via LinkedIn for more details of how you can get involved with our institute. And my day job, I'm Transport Planning Director at DHA, where we're a multidisciplinary planning consultancy across London and the South East. And my background as well is in transport development control in local government. I had a number of years at Kent County Council. So this morning's webinar, we're going to be exploring the role of transport investment in unlocking development opportunities across London and the South East. And of course, the principle of using transport as a catalyst to unlock strategic development opportunities is nothing new, is it? We can trace it back at least as far as Ebenezer Howard and his Garden Cities movement in the turn of the 20th century, so well over 100 years ago. And bringing ourselves right up to date, many of you will know we've had the launch of the New Towns Task Force report from the government's task force in the last week or so. And we have a government that acknowledges that there is a housing crisis in this country, and they've put tackling that at the centre of its manifesto. And we've seen a number of initiatives already to seek to do that. But the New Towns Task Force report is interesting, and if you've not read it yet or had a scan of it, I'd encourage you to do so. There are a couple of recommendations in there that are directly relevant to our discussion today. So recommendation 5, for example, says that new towns should aim to be built at a density sufficient to enable residents to walk to local amenities, support public transport, unlock better social infrastructure, and create active and livable neighbourhoods, with government establishing minimum density thresholds. And recommendation 10 says that new towns should connect people to skills, jobs, services and amenities. This should include high quality public transport, walking and cycling networks within each town, and convenient connections to wider transport networks. So there's really clear support in there, and I think government have already indicated that they will be accepting and implementing those recommendations at pace, with, of course, a new Housing Secretary, Steve Reed, putting that very much at the centre of his pledges moving forward. So let's get into the discussion then. We've got an excellent lineup of speakers for you this morning. So each of them are going to spend up to 10 minutes sharing their views on the subject. And after that, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers from you online. So please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and they can go in as early as you like. We'll collect those and we'll allow good time to put those to our speakers at the end. So without further ado, our first speaker today is Jessica Clift. Jessica's Principal City Planner at Transport for London. She's got extensive experience developing, advising and reviewing transport business cases under both Australian and UK government frameworks. And Jessica's worked for TfL for over 11 years. So Jessica, thank you for being with us this morning. Look forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for the invite to present on this. So in this session, I'll be focusing more on a London lens in terms of how transport-led development works in London and how do we get the most out of that. So if we go to the next slide. So a key thing for London is, which is not going to surprise anyone on this call, is that there is a major shortage of housing. But there is a very high demand for more homes to be built in London. Our housing targets over the next 10 years is that 880,000 new homes are required to meet demand. And again, delivering housing to support a demand is a problem that the whole country faces. But in addition, London also has other challenges. We already have a high population of over 9 million, and that's expected to grow. We also have to manage a high number of transport trips which are made every day. That's over 25 million trips which are made daily. 62% of those are public transport or active modes. We also, following COVID, have an increasing risk of car dependency that we need to address and tackle. We also want to do things better. There's a need to do more for improving air quality, for the environment. Also, we have really complex land ownership in London, and much of the land which could be developed into housing has already been developed at some stage. And just like the development industry, inflation is hitting our construction market. So that hits our transport projects, but it also impacts those that are delivering our homes. If we go to the next slide. Yeah. So how do we go about responding to these challenges? So what the key things for London for helping us tackle these challenges is that we need to have long-term planning. You can't just think about 5 years or 10 years. We have 20-year plans that set a strong direction and policy context and work together. You have London Plan, which is our spatial development strategy, and the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which sets out our approach to transport. And together, they are integrating our transport and land use. They're directing our real tools for directing development to well-connected areas, to protecting land for transport, for making sure that things are inclusive and accessibly designed from the outset. And what that really means is that we can be proactive to growth rather than reactive. And that means that we can promote what we call good growth. If we go to the next slide. So what is good growth? Again, for those of you that are familiar with the London Plan or the Mayor's Transport Strategy, you have seen this principle, but it's basically not growth at any cost. We need more homes, but we don't, we want them to be socially and economically inclusive. We want them to be environmentally sustainable. So what that means is we're offering people across London the benefits of walking, cycling, and public transport use that in some areas in London we're very familiar with. They have had that for years, but there's quite a lot of areas in London that don't have that. And one of our key levers for that we have is for creating that change is through influencing new development. And we use transport to help unlock and deliver homes and jobs in a way that will improve quality of life. Go to the next slide. So what's transport's role in terms of shaping London? So key element here is that we use transport to support and direct the good growth to where do we want that growth to happen. So we can use transport, particularly in terms of improving connections, which improves profitability for our developers, which basically will push development into underdeveloped areas of the city. But also we need to influence that type of growth that happens. So we can use our transport services to make sure that any of those new developments, they are supported by public transport alternatives. They have the ability to walk and cycle. And also at the same time, we can use that to facilitate high density mixed use places. So again, which also reduces car use. So if we move to the next slide, this just gives you a bit of a sample for those of you that are less familiar with London is before TfL, some of the sort of approach was very car-centric. A lot of car space, even around transport nodes, was for car parks. While after TfL, we've really tied up this planning. So again, we have mixed-use development around our multimodal transport nodes, where we've got places for people to walk. But also we use measures of connectivity and addressing those connectivity measures so we can focus development and specifically link development to key metrics so that we can make sure that development isn't happening in the right areas. Move to the next slide. So we've had the London Plan for quite a few years now. We're already starting to see the success of this integrated transport planning in London. An example here is our Barking Riverside project. This is an overground extension and it allowed central London to be accessible from that location in 22 minutes. This improved connectivity into this area has enabled a construction of over 10,000 new homes at Barking Riverside, as well as new schools, healthcare, leisure facilities, 44% affordable housing. Another example is the Northern Line extension, which is our next slide there. So the Northern Line extension extends one of our tube lines from Kennington to Battersea. And this improved connectivity in this area was that is underserved by rail actually attracted major investment, and it was a real catalyst for investing in this area and changing the viability of development in this location. And it has supported and unlocked about 20,000 new homes in this location. Another big project that a lot of you will be familiar with is the Elizabeth Line. Again, this is the power of transport to a faster, high frequency, high capacity London rail line, which allows 1.5 million people within a 45-minute commute to West End, the City, Docklands. And this opens up new development corridors and regeneration because people want to live where they can access a lot of jobs. And that's really important for thinking about where we can actually make development successful. The early findings from the Elizabeth Line, for example, is also showing higher housing growth rates. So within 1 kilometre of Elizabeth Line stations, 52,500 new homes have already been delivered between 2017 and 2022. And this is about a 10.2% growth in housing stock in those specific areas, in comparison to the Greater London, which was only about 5.2. So again, that real catalyst for directing development where you want it to go. We go to the next one. But what's coming up? We have a new London plan, which is currently being developed. And it will take account of this much higher housing target that we've been set by government. Currently, our target is about 52,000 homes a year. Now, over a 10-year period, it will be about 88,000 a year, which is a colossal amount. For those of you that are interested, that draft plan is expected to be published in late spring or early summer next year. And a challenge for London and all cities in the UK is, again, about trying to facilitate this development, and particularly from my perspective, in terms of transport, it's how one of our challenges is looking at how that transport can be funded, because we know there are significant pressures on all budgets across the UK, but a key challenge, and we are developing a pipeline of projects, but at the moment we will need to work with multiple different stakeholders in terms of funding packages to actually push those through to delivery. So what are these schemes that we have in our pipeline that we're developing? The first one is our Docklands Light Railway extension to Thamesmead. These are considered a priority in our next London plan. If we move to the next slide, that will give a bit of a visual for people that are less familiar with the scheme. So again, this extension of the railway is really unlocking capacity and connectivity in key development and underdeveloped areas, unlocking about 25,000 homes and 10,000 jobs. Another major priority for us going forward is the Bakerloo Line extension. So this is an extension of our tube line further south into Lewisham and potentially further on to Hayes, which would involve converting the existing national rail line so that it can be used for LU operation. Again, quite a sizable project, this one, and is targeting particular opportunity areas. So again, unlocking between 20,000 to 50,000 more homes in the southeast. Another key upcoming priority is the West London Orbital. So this is a new overground route and connection. It builds on existing lines which are used by rail for freight right now. And provides, again, significant additional connectivity, particularly that orbital connection. Not everything is about going and connecting to the city. This one gives between 7,000 and 15,000 new homes. So then, in terms of thinking about these works, my sort of final thoughts on this topic is that London's success as a global city, it does depend on our ability to house and provide a good quality for our growing population. And our good transport connectivity and those investment that support that and provide more capacity enables housing and economic growth in high density sustainable forms. Our past transport investments, whether they be the Barking Riverside, the Northern Line extensions, Elizabeth Line, they have shown that we can deliver significant housing and use transport schemes to unlock and direct that growth. And London's future plans with the New London Plan will continue to integrate that land use and transport planning and the principles of good growth. But it is useful to be aware of that funding future transport investments will continue to be a challenge. And so we'll need to be, as we go forward, we will need to be continuing to explore funding mechanisms for transport investments that will catalyse and support development, but while also directing it to sustainable locations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. That was really interesting. And I think, you know, what happens in London, it's a bit like, you know, when they say when America catches a cold, you know, the rest of us quickly suffer the consequences. And I think it's very true of London's economy and its transport network. You know, we're so intertwined in the southeast. So thank you very much. I've certainly got some questions there, and I'm sure others will. As I've said at the start, you know, put those questions in the Q&A box so we can start to take a look at those and prepare to go through those at the end. So we've got next, scooting across the region down to Portsmouth. So Paul Walker is with us. He's head of passenger transport at Portsmouth City Council. And Paul has worked across the public and private sectors in the south of England, including most recently in Portsmouth and Southampton. And Paul won the Bus Centre of Excellence Bus Person of the Year award this year for the CIHT back in June for his exceptional contributions to the bus sector. So Paul, congratulations for that, and please take it away.
Thank you. That's a bit embarrassing, but thanks, Paul. Anyway, yes, as Paul said, I'm the head of passenger transport for Portsmouth City Council, and I'm really making the case for the bus really in terms of new development. So I just thought I'd outline on the next slide sort of the approach that we take in Portsmouth. Portsmouth, you might think is quite different to London, and in fact, it obviously is. It's only a population of 200,000 or so, but it's also the most densely populated city outside of London. So it does suffer from congestion, air quality problems, and obviously it's quite a tight island city. It's the UK's only island city. We've only got 3 roads that come in and out and 1 railway line. So it's all very congested. And our approach to transport and our approach to mass transit, I guess, in the city really stretches back to the sort of mid-late 2000s when the 4 highway authorities in South Hampshire, Portsmouth, the Isle of Wight, Southampton and Hampshire joined together to form Southern Transport, formerly Transport for South Hampshire. And really what that does is sets a strategy and an ambition for mass transit in the area. And what we've seen over that sort of almost 20 years now is things like the A3 bus corridor kick-off, the CLIPS dedicated busway provision. Also, we've seen new new public transport interchanges at Park and Ride and the Hard, which connects both ferry, rail, bus and coach. And we sort of are the latest incarnation of that story, that progress really is the Bus Service Improvement Plan, which is currently in rollout, and that has seen sort of lots of programs for delivery, including capital programs, so your traditional bus priority measures, but also service enhancements, ticketing initiatives, and also a zero emission buses program. If we move on to the next slide, what we have managed to do is grow our approach to public transport, but in particular buses, which are our main source of public transport in the city, on 4 main pillars. The first is to create passenger growth, because that looks after itself both commercially and in terms of achieving the aims of the City Council for congestion and air quality. Making those buses faster, because we know that the bus compared to the car in the city to places like Waterloo, Villeray Park is somewhere like around about 50 to 70% quicker than the bus, and we need to improve those bus journey times, but we also need to improve the reliability along those corridors, and also make sure that in an area like Portsmouth, which does suffer from deprivation, is very much a northern city plonked on the the south coast of England alongside Southampton, that those fares are affordable and enable people to get to work. The work that we've been doing has been quite successful. We've seen 41% passenger growth in buses over the last 2 years, 17% increase in passengers in the last year alone. We've seen the best post-COVID recovery of any UK city and currently have over 1 million passengers using our journeys every month. So we're really pleased with how progress is going. So how does that compare? How does that relate to development? If we move on to the next slide, it works on a micro and a macro level really for us. The micro level is stuff that we've been delivering through the Bus Service Improvement Plan. So we've got a civils programme which includes social benefit elements, or like any sort of civils contract really, which includes local sourcing and local employment, and that's really good for us. Certainly in terms of things like the Zero Emission Bus Programme, which was a £47 million project. We're working closely with local colleges to upskill engineers so they can actually work on electric vehicles as much as they can, or even in advance of diesel vehicles, for example. The projects that we implement are ones that deliver good benefit cost ratios. If you're in that game, you'll understand these kind of numbers, but the stuff that we've been delivering in terms of bus journey time improvements are between 6.9 and 13.1 from projects that we've done in terms of signal priority, for example. Just by way of background, if you achieve something like a BCR of 2 for a transport project, that's actually seen quite good. So those really are quite sort of racing numbers in terms of what we're delivering in terms of value for money. And also through those extra services, we've got 2 24-hour bus services now. We operate every day of the year, unlike London. So we've sort of really got we're really developing a sort of public transport first ethos, really. And what that does is, by having those extra services, whilst we need more engineers, more drivers and more buses for that, it also gives access to jobs. It supports the nighttime economy, but helps in terms of shift work for early and late starters. Another project that we're really proud of is the 16 to 19 ticketing, which helps youngsters get child fares, which helps access to their education and training. And then onto the next slide for the macro level. We're quite pleased with what's coming through the Integrated National Transport Policy and the Buses Bill. We're really pleased that the Buses Bill does not propose a one-size-fits-all approach. It means that we don't all adopt the Manchester-style franchising approach. Indeed, for ourselves in Portsmouth, we think we can deliver benefits that exceed franchising without the need to bring any of it into the public sector, and actually work in partnership with our private sector bus operators to deliver outcomes. And also we think that the Integrated National Transport Policy will help improve services, drive passenger growth and decarbonisation. So why is this bloke so obsessed with buses? If you just go back to the previous slide, sorry, it's mainly because just to make the point that 62% of all passenger journeys are by bus, yet 65% of the budget goes to rail, but only yields 8% of those passenger miles. And every time you step on a train, you're receiving £15 of government subsidy, as opposed to 74 pence for a bus journey. So really, what I'm saying is that buses really are good in terms of value for money and sort of social benefit, really. Moving on to the, I think it's pretty much the penultimate slide. Again, just to underline the economic contribution of the bus, work undertaken by the Confederation of Passenger Transport only last year showed that the contribution of bus users to the South East is around about £6 billion a year. I think it's quite useful just to mention that bus passengers generally visit city centres and economic areas more often than car users. They stay longer and they spend more, and spend about £1, and every £10 is on high street is spent by bus users, with a benefit cost ratio in the region of 4.5. So I think in terms of bus access on new developments, it's useful to remember that actually those people are economic contributors rather than what the perception of your average bus user may be, especially in the southeast of England. On to the final slide is really about how to enable new developments with buses. If we're looking at delivering as many homes as we are, we can all point to various developments that don't deliver in terms of accessibility and sustainability for transport. And we need to deal with car-dependent developments. We can look at many developments that I've been involved with in the past in places like Wiltshire and Oxfordshire, which are clearly never going to be able to sustain a bus service. And so I would urge developers and agents to talk with public transport teams as well as operators fairly early on, because bus really is the easiest form of mass transit to open up development, to get your travel plan through, and also to improve your modal mix. I think there's a need. Sorry, I was just taking a breath there. Sorry. There is a need to sort of link that development well, really, and concentrate buses in new development. Also, by having that early engagement, it means that we can plan out any problems that might be taking place. So if you look on this picture in the middle of the screen here, this is a development in Swindon where the roads really aren't wide enough to allow buses to go through. If there are any bus geeks on the call, you'll realise that's quite a short wheelbase single decker, which means it can probably maneuver around a little bit better than your average size single decker. However, that sort of development, the road isn't wide enough. There's very little in terms of infrastructure for buses, and so there's a need to connect those bus services not only to the site. So, for example, we often have developers come to us having planned their site out completely, made no provision for buses whatsoever, and what we need is slightly wider roads, which does tend to sort of give for the development overall. And what we try to do is what we need to do is try to make those bus services connect to multiple destinations and trying to reduce diversion of services. It's better to divert a bus than to create a site that is reliant totally on one bus service, because that is very likely to wash its face. But also don't assume that buses will just divert into your site or a site that's in your local plan. It might not be able to do so for a variety of reasons. So again, early engagement. And bear in mind, I've worked as both local authority and bus operator, and I've been told by many down at heel housing developers how they can't afford to fund bus services or such like. But you have to remember that the bus industry is very revenue intense, and the commercial risk of operators is very low, certainly post COVID. So how do we enable bus access through developer contributions? Something we really need to think about, because if you're going to have a site that's requires say 4 buses an hour to service it, that's going to be in the region of about £1 million subsidy a year. So how do we enable that through development? And I think that is me at that stage. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. You're in good company. I'm a bus geek as well. We had in our Kent group of CILT last week a bus summit. All of the operators represented for our region, and the contents of your last slide were very much a big talking point. And I think, I can't stress enough how important it is for local authorities to engage bus operators in strategic planning at the earliest possible stage for the reasons you said. And I think, that's really a big lesson learned for me over the last 10, 15 years is that, yes, trying to retrofit buses into new development never works well, and leads to some really big missed opportunities. So thank you, Paul. So our third and final speaker before we get into some questions is Craig Hatton. So Craig's a chartered town planner, and he leads on third-party planning applications that impact the rail network for Network Rail. Also involvement there in local planning and planning policy engagement as well, as part of what is an increasing town planning team within Network Rail, which is positive to hear. And Craig has previous experience as major house builder, as well as 7 years working on a local authority's local plan from inception to examination. So, Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. So if we just move on to the next slide. So Network Rail obviously covers the whole of the UK. We're divided into five regions. We're the provider of rail infrastructure, over 20,000 miles worth of track, and all the signalling and all that equipment that supports the operational railway. So I'm part of the southern region, which covers London and the southeast, but we obviously cover the whole of the country, including a separate team that covers exclusively Scotland. And as such, we take sort of a national look at things in terms of how we plan for the railway. So the main aims really for Network Rail are to protect the operational railway, and all the safety issues that are associated with that is sort of primary purpose number one. We also seek mitigation or enhancement to the railway infrastructure where it's needed, particularly for third-party development that is close to the rail network. And we're also increasingly promoting non-operational railway land for development. So that's either disposing of a land to a third party to bring forward, or bringing forward the site ourselves as part of a joint venture with another developer. We have a number of agreements with developers that help to bring forward sites for us. And we're also continuing to promote sites through the local plan. And we also promote our infrastructure needs through infrastructure delivery plans. Obviously, in our role as a statutory consultee for planning applications, we comment on development that's close to the rail network. And generally speaking, we try and be as supportive as we can be for those third-party applications, given the increasing necessity for development around transport hubs. Next slide, please. So in terms of Network Rail as a developer as such, you may well have seen in recent months that we've formed our own development corporation now, which is called Platform 4. And the intention of Platform 4 is to bring forward around 40,000 homes across the UK. This is primarily using Network Rail owned land around stations, and the sort of timescale for that is within the next decade. Platform 4 is formed between Network Rail and the Department for Transport. So it is a government-owned company that is utilising railway land. And obviously that's part of the bigger picture of helping to meet national housing requirements of 1.5 million over the next Parliament. As I mentioned earlier, so we're divided into the 5 regions, and as well as Platform 4, each regional team has its own sort of development team as well. So they look at developing sort of smaller non-operational land. This generally focuses on sort of smaller sites around the stations, but also looks at reusing land as part of depots, whether there's unused railway sidings that could be brought forward, and also looking also at the feasibility of redeveloping station car parks and potentially re-providing that car park as part of a rationalisation strategy. So we're primarily focused on residential development when we look at ourselves as a developer, but options are kept open because of the difficulty around some of the locations and some of the access to railway land. So we also promote other land uses as well to help to contribute towards local authorities' need. And as sort of mentioned earlier, we're increasingly promoting sites through local plans and master planning exercises. In my region, we've sort of had success in having a number of sites allocated in draft and adopted local plans over the last few years. And also for larger redevelopment schemes, we are sort of leading on a master plan process to build up towards a bigger planning application. And we've currently got a couple of existing master plan exercises being undertaken with Westminster City Council in relation to London Victoria Station, and also with Lambeth Borough Council in terms of Waterloo Station as well as part of the Waterloo Master Plan to seek to bring that forward. Next slide, please. So I've just got a case study really just to talk about. So Beaugoods Yard is sort of the first such master plan scheme that Network Rail has sort of delivered on our own. So it was a master plan for around 30 acres of brownfield land, just to the south of the London Stadium and within the sort of the Olympic legacy estate. This was granted outline planning consent by the LLDC in 2024 in October. I think it was probably one of the last decisions that was taken before powers are transferred to the London boroughs. In this case, it would be Newham. And basically, this scheme sort of demonstrates the tension that exists between railway land and also operational railway land, and also the need to try and provide some form of development or make better use of that at least anyway. So it contains one of London's last remaining railheads. We're loath to lose any sort of freight sites for the railway. This one in particular is particularly important because it can supply over 2 million tonnes of concrete, and it was a key part in helping to bring forward both the venues for the Olympic Park as well as the development that followed following the end of the Olympics. It is a designated strategic industrial land site. And so the proposal is to retain the railhead and also the concrete batching plants that are currently on the site, but to improve those to make more efficient use of land. And the proposals as part of the sort of redevelopment scheme include employment land, leisure and commercial space, and also providing some additional landscaping and some much improved public realm to sort of provide further connections and also links through to the DLR station at Pudding Mill Lane, which is just to the east of the site. And obviously Stratford Station is not too far away from that either. So this was kind of a really good example of where we've sort of brought something forward from master plan, considering the constraints of the rail network to come hopefully to a pretty good outcome moving forward with planning consent now granted. Next slide, please. So whilst Bow Goods Yard is sort of a relevant and very effective case study, there are a number of challenges associated with land around the railway. So this is both for specific Network Rail land, but also for land that may be owned by a third party that look to bring that forward. I've just provided an example there of Selhurst, which is in Croydon, which is not atypical, but kind of demonstrates the extent of railway land holdings that could be present. And being located in Croydon, it is generally speaking a site where higher density development would be sort of more heavily supported. And I think, as you can see from there, there's a train depot as well as the station and a significant amount of tracks. So it just shows the challenges around trying to best reuse some of that land where possible. As part of that, we're obligated to ensure that any land that we do dispose of to a third party or that we seek to try and develop ourselves isn't required as part of any longer term railway strategic planning. Clearly, once it's been lost to the railway, it won't be possible to get it back. So as part of this process, it requires significant consultation with many stakeholders within Network Rail before it can be approved and cleared for sale or for development for alternative use. And obviously this can take quite a significant period of time. Network Rail manages 20 stations across the UK. We've got 13 in London and the South East, and the remainder are leased to the train operating company that runs services through those particular stations. And as part of that consultation process, the train operating companies, through their leasehold agreements, must agree to any changes regarding land that sits within their leasehold. So they do have quite a significant say in terms of what happens to land around the station in particular. However, greater integration between Network Rail and the train operating companies through the forming of Great British Railways should help to reduce these delays. And we're increasingly working more and more integrated with those train operating companies as time moves on and as we head towards GBR being realised through legislation. And next slide, please. So what can help to bring forward railway sites in particular? So clearly continuing support for brownfield development around transport hubs is a key part of that. And obviously the government looking at a presumption in favour helps this significantly when it comes to that decision being made about whether to retain land for railway need or if it can be released for other uses. But also continued investment, particularly of a large scale on infrastructure projects, can also be a catalyst for unleashing growth around the railway. So the Brighton Main Line upgrades in my region is a particularly important one, as that would sort of increase or remove bottlenecks, particularly around Croydon. And much of the Croydon local plan that's currently at examination is based around railway upgrades that could release some land to develop as well. And also access for all stations, so that provides step-free access for all to be able to access the station. And they're the sort of locations where we would actively promote developers to look at sites because it makes the most of an accessible rail network. However, there are challenges with that. Many suburban stations lack transport capacity and some local amenities to support high density development. This is also particularly for railway stations that sit within Greenbelt. There's often very little by way of access or facilities around it. So it does require the developer to take quite a holistic approach to look at how best to make the most of those sites and also to try and improve the station where possible as well. And significant investment in infrastructure, including upgrades to stations, road improvements, and potentially looking at increasing public transport frequency, whether it be additional train services serving that particular station or improving the bus services, just help to make these larger scale housing developments, particularly in more isolated locations, more sustainable and increase the chances of them being able to be brought forward and be more successful. Next slide. So just in summary, so Network Rail, we're taking a much more active role in meeting the nation's housing requirements and promoting the use of railway land that is no longer required. As part of that, we're increasing engagement with developers and local planning authorities and trying to support growth where we can. Clearly that can't be at the expense of the rail network, and where we can demonstrate that there is a need to improve capacity or accessibility at station, for example, then we continue to make that case for investment. But political support for growth around the transport hubs remains vitally important, really. And obviously the current conditions under the Labour government present key opportunities. And that's one of the main drivers as to why Platform 4 has been formed. The key risk really is the need to sort of review the need for the railway land and ensure that it's actually suitable for development. It's in the right location, and it's not providing a use that could conflict with existing uses around. Because of the challenges around getting approval for that sort of land disposal, it can take time to bring this forward, especially if it also requires the relocation of rail operations. So it's really important to engage with ourselves as early as possible. And as I mentioned before, there's quite a lot of internal processes that we have to go through in order to secure approval around releasing land for development. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you, Craig. I think we've covered certainly all the key modes there in that short 40-minute stint. So that's fantastic. So over to questions. We've got just under 20 minutes if we have questions coming in. So we've got one straight off the bat from Andrew, and I think Andrew, you put your question in during Paul Walker's presentation, so I'm assuming this is aimed at Paul first and foremost. So the question from Andrew, Paul, is the cost per mile of the three schemes varies considerably. There are other more modest schemes possible. How can we ensure schemes that could be affordable are given due priority? Paul, do you have an answer to that?
Not particularly, because I didn't give any three schemes detail about three schemes, so I was struggling to find what that's in relation to.
Maybe
it might have been Jessica's.
It was Jessica. Sorry, apologies for that. It was Jessica.
I can try.
You can give your view on it, Paul. You're very welcome. But yeah, you're right. Andrew's clarified that was aimed at TfL. So yeah, my apologies there. I think it may have tripped into your presentation, Paul, but it was aimed at Jessica. So Jessica, please.
Yeah, so this is, again, in my presentation, talked about the West London Orbital, and we talked about Bakerloo Line Extension and DLR Thamesmead. And I guess the key thing is that if we think about what actually schemes deliver, if I think back to the Northern Line Extension, that unlocked an area of 20,000 homes. If I think about what Craig just was talking about in terms of Platform 4, they're looking at 40,000 new homes over 10 years. The challenge we have in London is that with the demand for housing is that I need to deliver 88,000 new homes each year. So there's quite a big gap. And so as much as there is definitely a whole place for smaller improvements, again, for providing that capacity that supports the extra nearly 2 billion people that would be expected to live in London, whether that be station upgrades, step-free. We're seeing a lot of stuff in terms of that will bus schemes, walking, cycling. But it's a whole package of work that comes together. But basically, if you want really, really big change in housing numbers, you need to be able to do big investments to unlock those areas, to change the viability of development, but also to provide the capacity and transport capacity to support that development so that it is sustainable. And that's the tricky part there, is that definitely smaller schemes have their place. And I focus on the big schemes because that's the big ones. But all this work we look at in a broader context in terms of master planning. But I guess the key thing is that if you want big change, you need to do things significantly differently and open up these new areas.
Yeah, and I suppose, Jessica, I mean, linked to that, I know the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, gets a lot of flack, certainly from his political opponents, over, in their view, under-delivering housing in London. And I know, the previous government made quite a big play about that. And obviously there's politics involved there. But there is some truth in that. The sort of demand for housing is still far outstripping supply in London. I mean, it's part of the reason for that, just the fact that, some of these solutions to infrastructure to unlock these opportunity sites just take so much time, planning and money to bring forward. Delivering infrastructure in London is, far more expensive, far more complex than on a greenfield site in Kent or Sussex, for example. Is that a fair reflection?
I think it is a fair reflection. I think, when you're not dealing with a green site, you're developing land that's already been developed, and you're working in quite a complex system. But so you sort of have the opportunity that there is a huge demand that people want to live in London. They want those connections. They want to build there. If you build it, people will come. But again, there is this trade-off that it is quite expensive to build in London. So we need to be, in terms of our work, trying to help that and navigate those two levers.
Absolutely. I've got another question, and I think this is aimed at Paul, but I think this is one that we can all probably give some thoughts on. So our question is, the buses are often used by people on lower incomes, households without cars, women and young people, often those who are the least likely to engage with consultations. How can we ensure better engagement with these people who are most likely to benefit from new public transport projects? And I think that there is a lot of truth in that. We do find that some of those segments of the population who are more likely to use buses, yes, they aren't as engaged in local politics, in local consultations. Perhaps that's why the humble bus doesn't always get the look in that it deserves in terms of new project priorities. So, yeah, Paul, what are your reflections on that?
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't know where that question was going, but it's a really, really, really good one. I suppose from our point of view, what we do in Portsmouth is we do quite a lot of public engagement with our citizens anyway. Certainly from a sort of transport point of view, we do quite targeted consultations every 2 years. And the last one we did was 23. And what was most important for them in transport, what the most important issue for residents in transport was public transport. Within that, it was buses. Within that, it was real-time information at bus stops. So we reformatted the capital programme for real-time information, which was supposed to deliver about an extra 100 real-time information displays. And we reformatted the programme, so we've now got real-time information at 90% of bus stops. We've only got about 570 or so, but 90% of them have got real-time information. And then also what we try and do is we've invested and we work quite closely with our operators, and we do see it as hand in glove. There's two things that come out of that in terms of general consultations, and I think the question was more about schemes rather than development per se. And what we do two things. All our buses through the BSIP funding and through operator funding have all got next stop announcements, next stop display screens on them. And so what we do is when we're doing a consultation that affects bus users, we ask bus users to comment on that consultation by giving them a QR code with a link to the consultation. So all the buses that are running through an area that we are looking at developing schemes on, they're on the screens all the time, and people can snap the QR code and do it. The other thing is we consult with the drivers, because they're the professional drivers. They're our eyes and ears out on the street, and they're a real untapped resource. So we do two things with that. First of all, we engage through the various initiatives that operators have to talk to their drivers through social, sort of dedicated social media they have. But we also go and sit in the canteens and talk to drivers and see where the problems are as well. So we work very closely with the operators. So we do go and engage with the drivers, and then we also do. You said we did sessions as well, so at least they know they've got feedback from that. So we try to engage with professional drivers through different methods, and we also engage bus users through sort of advertising on the buses. But you are right, the question is absolutely spot on, that you do have the situation that cyclists are well organised, motorists are well organised, but bus users generally aren't quite as well organised, and you end up in a drafty church hall talking about why the number 23 doesn't go anti-clockwise on every third Tuesday, and it is trying to get that right level of engagement, which we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I mentioned our CILT Kent Bus Summit last week, and there was a bit of talk about driverless buses, and is that the future? Is it the solution to delivering more economic bus services? And there's clearly still some big practical hurdles to that. But I think your point there, Paul, about your bus driver is your eyes and ears, is almost representing those bus users, seeing their challenges and opportunities out there on the network. And they're your customer service agent as well. They're giving people, that reassurance, that safety on a day-to-day basis. So I think they can be very underrated and under-engaged with as well. Craig, you've put your camera on. Did you have some thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I was just gonna add really to what Paul said. So from a rail perspective, We're very conscious that obviously not everybody can access a rail station that easily. It could be a significant walk, and in terms of trying to promote sustainable active travel, we are increasingly linking up with bus companies and with the Highways Authority to try and create genuine interchanges at stations, and also provide situations where new development provides that real-time information to allow a sort of seamless change between a bus journey and getting onto the train. Because transport exclusion is a particularly prevalently recognised thing, particularly for certain communities now. So we are actively trying to mend that situation as best as we possibly can. It doesn't fit every time, but clearly if somebody can get on the bus that goes directly to a train station that gets them onto the train as well, I think is helpful for that, and obviously prevents people having to drive.
Thanks, Craig. And Jessica as well?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to pick more about sort of that consultation and how do you get more engagement with different groups. And one of the things that we've been finding in TfL is instead of putting your consultation or your engagement products in a dusty town hall, but actually putting them where people want to be, putting them in the shopping centres, putting them in where they're going to be out and about anyway, rather than expecting everyone to have to come to you. But, you know, go somewhere in the evening where to the cinemas, whatever your local attractors are in that area, putting that so that people don't have to necessarily divert their attention to come to you, but making your consultation part of everyday life.
Absolutely agreed. I think you know, we're all guilty. I think certainly in my industry of, because we need to be engaged in the local goings on. We're looking at the local press. We're engaging with local authorities. We assume that the wider populace is doing the same, that we all buy the weekly local paper like we did maybe 30 years ago. And that's just not the case. We engage with the world around us in so many different ways now. And, you know, local authorities and indeed third-party developers need to really embrace those as well. I think we're not quite good enough at that. So I've got no more questions in the Q&A. Please, we've got just under 10 minutes if any of you online want to add some questions. I've got a couple of my own though. I think another initiative of the government at the moment is local government reorganisation, and there's two aspects to that. One is creating more London-style mayoral strategic authorities across the country, and there are certain parts of the South East that have joined the fast track for that, including Sussex, and that will, the mayor, as he does in London, will have certain strategic planning powers and more power over transport planning as well, and then the second part of that is sort of where there are two-tier areas at the moment. So you've got counties and district councils. So again, Kent, Sussex, Surrey are examples of those, to create unitary authorities, so to join them up, as for example, Portsmouth is, as Brighton is, for example, which in theory, again, should improve strategic planning in the sense that you're linking planning and highway authorities, for example. So do the panel think that, you know, that the move towards more strategic planning, both at that mayoral level, but also through unitary governance, is a step forward in terms of delivering better transport integrated development, or are there other levers that government could pull to enhance that better or further? I'll start with Paul.
10 minutes, you say? I think yeah, I have to declare an interest. I'm leading the public transport element of the Hampshire and Solent part of devolution. I think there are definitely opportunities as there are threats. I mean, from a purely unitary authority point of view, from Portsmouth, at the moment, if you take the bus service improvement plan cash we get, and I'm dealing with schemes rather than sort of strategic for now. But if you look at that comes entirely down to Portsmouth City Council to deliver. That will then change. So actually, you are creating a two-tier system, even though it's being seen as a one-tier system, because a lot of the powers of the City Council will be going up to the mayoral authority. So the council will maintain its role as highway authority, but the transport authority element goes up to the mayoral combined authority. So how does that work? Because the mayor has the right to direct delivery of transport schemes on the road. And when you've got somewhere like Portsmouth, this is a purely personal view, by the way, when you've got somewhere like Portsmouth that has got very little off-street parking, every inch of road space is really fought over. So if the mayor is going to be directing for loads of parking outside of shops to be taken away to the lower tier unitary authority, then that's going to be quite a challenging situation. We've tried to deal with it certainly in South Hampshire, by working more closely together, because the city boundaries of both Portsmouth and Southampton are really tight. So therefore, the travel to work area goes way beyond into Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So I think there's an opportunity to tie all that together. What we do at the moment, that my initial slide showed how we work together, and certainly we have the same transport strategy and the same approach, so that should transfer across quite neatly, if I'm honest. From a planning point of view, again, I think that's going to be quite interesting, because it certainly creates an opportunity to better deliver housing and strategic planning. I think that's probably been missing, because I can remember the old county structure plans, but probably not very many people could remember those. But they were certainly very good in terms of allocating how you would crack on and deliver your housing numbers. And I think that's certainly been missing of late, in terms of how smaller unitary authorities and certainly two-tier authorities behave.
Well, that's great, and as you say, I think Hampshire, South Hampshire in particular, has kind of led the way in terms of linking up planning and transport for some time. So it's good to hear reflections on that. Jessica, from a London perspective, obviously, as I said, that's the model the government wants to try and roll out. So are you in favour of that?
I think it sounds like a good idea. Again, I think as Paul said, one of the biggest issues you have is boundaries. And, because services and people's lives aren't restricted to your local area boundary or your political boundary. So actually being able to think about that in a wider context, and, what are the key origins and destinations, and having that joined up planning, thinking about corridors rather than one area causing problem for the next county, in my mind, can only help things progress and unlock more development that is sustainable.
Thank you, Jessica. And then Craig.
Yeah, certainly as an infrastructure point of view, obviously the railway doesn't respect local authority boundaries. So we have a number of cross-boundary issues where you might get support from one authority and pushback from another. So clearly a more combined, joined-up approach would help that. And it would also assist in, rail upgrades are expensive, so a huge chunk of that funding comes from government, and creating a case where there is a wider benefit rather than just perhaps isolated to one particular area, but it can be the benefits of those upgrades can be felt wider, is a huge part of getting that funding in. And as sort of mentioned in my slide, in terms of Elizabeth Line's similar sort of approach, where rail upgrades can unlock land for development, really. So it's a question of trying to get the funding in to do the work to then unlock the land in most of the cases. So it's easy to make that case when you are coming at it from a bigger strategic perspective.
Great, thank you, Craig. Well, I think our time is at an end, unfortunately. This is certainly, as Paul alluded to, a topic that could spread into lots of other big topical debates over more than the hour that we've got. So I'm afraid I have to bring it to a close there. So I think I go away from this with certainly some renewed enthusiasm as to what can be achieved. I think we've heard both at the small scale in terms of how we can better integrate buses into new development, which is a relatively easy win, through to the much larger, longer term plans that both Craig and Jessica have talked about. How the building blocks are being put in place quite literally to deliver more transport focused, sustainable communities moving forward. So I take a lot of heart from that, but I do think it's those age-old things we ask of governments, both blue, red, and other shades, is we just need that longer-term certainty over planning and funding. We can't work in sort of 3 or 5 year horizons when we're trying to deliver some of this infrastructure. And I think integration of key decision makers is also key, and that's not just about how regional and local government works. It's, as we've said, bringing in Network Rail, bringing in bus operators, and bringing in the travelling public to ensure that we shape these communities in the way that's going to work best for them. So thank you all very much. Thank you particularly to our speakers today for their time and their presentations. Thank you to Waterfront Conference Company for putting on this event. And of course, thank you to our viewers for engaging, for your questions, and for your time this morning. Thank you very much.